3 meals a day, no snacks. I just throw all that rule book out the window for ADHDers.
Amber Macintosh,
an ADHD Nutrition Coach, destroying all diet myths so you can live peacefully.
What 3 foods are your superfoods that help people with ADHD?
Well, Alec, you said I could only bring 3. So the first one I'm going to is an egg. So this contains something called choline. It's such an important one because it helps us with memory, with focus, muscle movement. It's got a lot going on in an egg, and it's cheap.
Fascinating. What's next?
The next one is its colour is telling you how good it is. And the third one, and it doesn't matter what brand, but this is...
Let's bust some diet myths. Are there any commonly known diet myths that you can't believe people still think are credible?
How if we just eat a little bit of fermented food, we're suddenly going to get this huge boost of serotonin into the brain. They're great foods to eat. Fibrous foods, things that feed the gut microbes. But again, let's be realistic. I love kimchi. I make my own sauerkraut. I like a bit of kefir. I don't know many 8-year-olds that do.
What do you think of Joe Wick's latest comments about children with ADHD and their diet?
I felt for Joe that day because...
I'm sure you've heard this a million times on other podcasts, but it really does help if you follow the show or subscribe on YouTube, because it really helps me get bigger and better guests. And if you subscribe, I'll return the favour by promising that I'll never let this podcast be sponsored by Huel. Amber, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Alex, for having me.
As a nutrition coach with ADHD, what do you think of Joe Wick's latest comments about children with ADHD and their diet?
I felt for Joe that day because the moment I saw it and heard it, I knew it had been misconstrued in the media, and I know it had been picked up and his words would have been skewed. But by then, unfortunately, of course, it was too late. People were jumping all over it. And I think what he was trying to put across, and from his own personal experience of eating a lot of processed food when he was growing up, is that hopefully we do all know that a highly processed diet isn't good for our bodies, and therefore it isn't good for our brains. It's not ideal for children, but I do also understand that we're all trying to do our best as parents. There are foods that many kids love, and it's okay from time to time to dip into that processed world, if you like. But from my perspective, what I love to try to help people to do as much as possible is to cook from scratch, to get the family involved, to get kids cooking, to get kids understanding colour, what all their vegetables are, what all their fruits are. You have to remember at the supermarket, what frustrates me is you walk in and you see this wall of processed foods, all in rip-top packages. And it's actually quite difficult to go round the back and find your fresh fruits and vegetables. So that's what I would advise people to do. You know, take your child by the hand and walk round the periphery of your supermarket and pick things up that are fresh and think about how you're going to cook them together. It actually also makes our food far less expensive, which is something that frustrates me, because actually when it's all been put together for you, you'll see that it is more expensive that way round. I also think it's interesting to look at some of those ingredients, even something that looks relatively healthy. If it's all been packaged up together and made by the supermarket, when you look on the back, I think you'll find a lot of ingredients you don't recognise. If you're reading something you don't recognise, why are you eating it? Why are you giving it to a young child with a developing brain at a stage when their nutrients are so important to their brain, but also their behaviour? So I understand what Joe was trying to say, in that when he was young, he definitely felt the sensation of being more hyper as such, or more elevated in himself when he ate a lot of processed food. That's what he was trying to put across. But, you know, it does get skewed, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. Are there any particular ultra-processed foods that are particularly unhelpful if you have an ADHD brain?
No, I wouldn't want to say that there are precise ingredients, and I wouldn't want to scaremonger anybody. I would like to reiterate that we need to try to cook from scratch more often. We need to encourage children to cook with us and to recognise what they're cooking, and to allow themselves the treat right? If we're all going out with friends and we want a Mackie D's and it's a party, that's okay. I'm not here as a nutrition coach saying you can't go and enjoy that. I've done the same myself. I allow my teenagers to do the same when they're with mates. But when we're as a family, cooking together, eating in community, which is something I hope we did get out of lockdown, is that we began to do things more together and help each other out. So no, there aren't precise ingredients. What I would say, going back to what I mentioned about looking at ingredient labels, we don't have to do it obsessively, but do look at the back of things, and where you see a chemical, ask yourself why you're eating it. What's happening there is we're buying things in the supermarket that has not been made by a chef, hasn't even been made by a food person as such, but has been made by a chemist. That should scare us slightly. That's kind of mad, isn't it? Yeah.
Gosh, you've made me think. I had a neuroscientist on a couple of weeks ago, and he said if you can't pronounce the ingredient, it should make you think why it's there.
I agree.
What are the fundamental building blocks of diet and nutrition that you think it would be helpful for someone with ADHD to understand in order to tailor their diet to their needs?
I think we need to simplify things. I think especially within social media, we're doing sort of the myths and the woes and the worries about food, or this is the magic pill and it's going to be the cure-all for everything. I think the first thing I want to say about ADHD is, we're not here to fix anything, are we? We're here to live in this beautiful brain and to uncover all the amazing positives about it. So the way I eat for my own ADHD brain is to really think about how I can lift it, how I can maximize and harness the potential of ADHD brains in myself and in the people that I'm supporting through coaching. So protein is important to me. It's kind of something I bang on about, if I'm honest. I bore everyone rigid about the protein piece. But it's particularly important to me, for example, at breakfast. Because if we can start right, we'll probably flow through the rest of the day eating well. But if we skip, which a lot of people are saying, even teenagers repeatedly telling me, oh no, I haven't got time. I've got to race to school. I've got to jump on the bus. I haven't got time for that. That worries me because, again, going back to simplicity, why it worries me is that you've missed a meal. What a shame. You've missed the opportunity for natural fats, for protein that supports our brains, for the micronutrients that we're eating. So that's your vitamins and your minerals, your fiber. You've just missed the whole piece. And you've only now got 2 more meals to catch that all up with. And we need a lot more protein than we expect. So you can kind of Google that depending on your height and weight ratio. But you could look at a sort of approximation at about 13 years of age. We reach sort of like a peak, if you like, of our need for protein. And it's around the 50 gram mark. And if you think that an egg is 6 grams, a side of chicken or beef or beans, I might add, because there isn't one is better than another when you're talking about protein. Gram for gram, they weigh in and they're as good as each other. That's about 25. And my maths isn't the best, but we're thinking about how we're going to get through the day having eaten, a good amount of protein towards that 50 grams. And I often speak to people that will say, well, I've had 6 bricks of Weetabix for breakfast. And then I've had sausage roll and chips at lunch at the canteen. I'm like, okay. And then when I got home, I whizzed past the McDonald's or whatever, and I've grabbed, something else that's pretty beige. And you just got to ask yourself, where was the protein? Yeah. And it's important because we need the protein piece to make the amino acid building blocks for our neurotransmitters, which gets a bit boring and sciencey, but stuff like the serotonin, the dopamine, we need protein in the very first place to use the enzymatic reactions of the body to extrapolate the amino acids we then need. But then the bit that joins up with that is we are nuanced beings as humans. So it's not just about whether you got your tyrosine for your dopamine and whether you got your tryptophan for your serotonin. It's actually how does that pathway make it to the receptor to make it effective for an ADHD brain? That involves the micronutrients. So that involves the minerals and the vitamins that help that pathway get to where we need it. So essentially, we need the colour, the variety, every time we see colour and variety in our diet, we are seeing vitamins and minerals. So I love that idea that if, and antioxidants, if kids could see every colour of every different lovely rainbow vegetable and fruit and choose different ones every day, they would know they're getting yet another amazing vitamin and mineral. All those things are lovely and anti-inflammatory. And when I say anti-inflammatory, I'm talking about our brains as well. We want them to feel soothed. We want them to feel comfortable. And we want us to be able to focus and to concentrate. And if we can put that all together, hey presto. So it's actually, I hope I haven't made it sound complicated, because it's actually really easy. It's, a beautiful side of meat or fish or beans if you're vegan. And it's the colour and variety. And yes, definitely the carbohydrates as well. I'm not saying that they're, the mean guys here. But could it be fresh cut potato chips you've made yourself rather than from a packet? And seeing it all together, you want to look essentially into your bowl or into your plate and say, I can see my natural fats, my protein, my fibre, and my carbohydrates. And I'm seeing them all together. And that's what I talk to kids directly in schools about. We make dishes together. We make things like poke bowls. They're kind of trendy, but they're a brilliant example of all the colour, all the variety, and all the most needed categories, those macro food groups together.
Where else could someone get that all-important protein for breakfast if they're a vegetarian, vegan?
Yeah, so there's lots of things. So you could have, I often talk about the better breakfast options versus something like cereal. I'm not demonising cereal, but if I was to demonise anything, maybe I might, only in as much as it's okay to have it, but do we have to do it every day? Could one small tweak be that you mix up your mornings with another type of breakfast? So it could be, for someone who's vegan, good slab of sourdough with cheese alternatives. So there's some lovely ones that are made from cashew nuts. You could have avocado. You could have the both. What about layering the both of those? You've got natural fats, proteins, and fibres together. Sprinkle some seeds on top or some chili, whatever suits, lots of lemon, maybe apple cider vinegar, and you've got something, quite delicious. One of my other favourites is a yogurt. So dairy, if you're okay to eat dairy, if you're vegan, loads of options out there now, from coconut to nut alternatives. Your choice of fruit, again, a simple way to mix that up is different fruit every morning, and then your choice of granola, which is awesome, nuts, seeds. Again, can we make them? They are so much easier to make than we think. So I'd love people to make their own granola. And again, it's what we call our Sunday night ritual. So we all make our granola, slightly different variations, but yeah, that's a really great breakfast option. And then it's okay, on the other days to have cereal. I don't want to sit here and be that nutrition person that says, you must do something, or you have to totally ditch cereal permanently, scrap it out of the cupboards when you listen to me. And no, none of that. My own family don't do that. We've got Cocoa Pops. My son loves them as a treat, but not every day. And I think that's the key. The other thing I've learned from my daughter, who's 14, is one morning she said to me, Mum, all I fancy is a bagel and Nutella. And I thought, for the people that I'm coaching, fair enough. I need to listen to you, and that's good feedback. And I said, all right, meet me halfway. Have the other side of bagel with some scrambled egg I'm making. I said, how does that sound to you? And she said, yeah, that works. And I thought, brilliant. I've got direct feedback that that's a doable option. Me saying you cannot have the Nutella on the bagel was just a bit too far. So I hope that that's helpful for families, rather than it's this or it's that, which it's not.
Love Nutella.
Yeah. Meet each other halfway. Yeah, exactly. Enjoy your treat that you enjoy, Alex. Yeah.
Sit on the sofa with a spoon. Maybe too much.
Yeah. That's a different type of eating. Yeah. We all do that as ADHDers. Yeah. I'm not sure that I'm actually hungry, but possibly I'm bored and I'm
just eating
snacking.
Stimulation.
Yep, totally.
If someone wanted to feed their dopamine and serotonin hungry brain, they wanted to give themselves the best optimal day, focus, concentration, what would be a breakfast to avoid?
An empty breakfast like that Weetabix, all those Cocoa Pops, to be honest. a croissant and coffee, that's an interesting one, popular, especially amongst those of us heading off to work. What does that do to us? This comes into blood sugar, I suppose. It gives us a screeching high. Feels so good at the time, don't get me wrong. It's the thing I fancy most first thing in the morning. Pan au chocolat on a nice, that chocolatey vibe, and then a coffee. They go so well together. And I just have to convince myself why it's better to start with something that's got fat and protein. Because a screeching high in your blood sugar also is a screeching high for your dopamine. That's why it feels so good. But the drop the other side, which you will get, is a horrible drop in energy. It's a drop in the brain's energy. So you feel lethargic, your brain switches off. You'll notice you start yawning and you simply cannot concentrate for long. And then at about 11 o'clock, that's replaced with the need for the screeching high. From both your blood sugar saying, I've dropped way too low, and also your dopamine saying, just help me out here, I'm flatlined, where are we? And then you'll fancy the thing that you just had for breakfast. So another way you could, again, I don't want to demonize these things, so another way you could fix that, let's say, is meet yourself halfway. So what about if you had the yogurt, the granola, and the fruit, ate that first to slow everything down, then had your croissant as well, and then had your coffee. There's a lot of research around if we get the fat, the protein, and the fiber in first, they act like a dam to slow blood sugar. And then maybe you'll be full enough with that, and maybe then you don't fancy the croissant. But if you do, better after those first things, if that makes sense. Better after the fat, the protein, and the fiber, because it will slow the absorption of those sugars down, and it will make your coffee that you might enjoy a steadier vibe, a steadier feel. Yeah.
What's your opinion on coffee? Coffee, is it good or bad for the ADHD brain?
It's a plant. So I'm all in favour of all plants. And where do I stand on coffee? A lot of people with ADHD have some challenges in what we call the methylation process, so the processing of things, and that includes the catecholamines in the brain. So when the neurotransmitters have done their work, how we actually get rid of dopamine, how we get rid of serotonin, acetylcholine, all the other neurotransmitters, is just as important actually as having them there in the first place, because that can aggravate our ADHD brains. So actually with coffee, if you're quite sensitive to coffee, you'll need a very small amount to get quite an interesting, energetic high, if you like. It is nature's stimulant, as is cocoa or cacao, as it's better known. And for that reason, if you need a bit of a bump and you need some stimulation, I'm okay with that. Yeah. It does this to me, make some of us who really find it hard to process coffee, something similar here with alcohol, very jittery and nervous, or make us talk very quickly, make us maybe stumble over our words. Just try to make sure you're drinking that coffee, as I said before, after having eaten a substantial good breakfast or just after lunch. You take these things on their own and they're going to give you that slightly too much of a stimulation. And then don't get me wrong, there's other brains where they need a good 3 black coffees to just even get there. So actually in an inattentive ADHD space, it is something I do recommend to people. Even, younger people, teenagers and things, if they really notice it gives them that little bit that they need for their morning lessons, then yeah, good quality organic coffee, why not?
Isn't it expensive to have a healthy diet that's friendly for the ADHD brain?
No, I feel quite strongly about that. Not at all. No, I look at something that I regularly eat, like chicken thighs. Less expensive than chicken breast. Not as popular because I don't think we love that sinuous texture, but actually the sinuous stuff is the good stuff. That's the collagen of the animal, and we need to eat collagen to have it in our own bodies. It's the cheapest thing you can buy, Vegetables, instead of all packaged up and already put in some kind of sauce, so much cheaper. Your local markets, that sort of thing, like seek these things out. Eat in season. If you're buying fruit that's flown over from South Africa, firstly, gosh, what a process, and air miles and all of that side of things. But also it's likely to be very expensive because it's completely out of our season. So be eating the raspberries that are just coming in, be eating the apples when it's in our season. It's quite hard to eat seasonally, interestingly. I've tried to do it for about 6 months. And if you're in the depths of winter in England, it's a lot of root veg. Not everybody loves, but try to do that, because actually I would argue with anybody it's less expensive. Look at what you're spending on a Deliveroo. Look at what you're spending even, I won't say all the names, but at the fast food places. Actually, I know your bills will be higher than if you have invested in putting the list together, going to buy those things together, looking out for which one's more expensive than another. Yeah, no, I definitely think it's less expensive to eat well, healthy, a good whole diet.
Fascinating. A great hack I do now is, because I used to buy fresh veg and I used to use half of it and then the other half would go in the bin. So wasted money straight into the bin. Now I buy frozen veg. The question is, and I heard this, is it true or not that frozen vegetables retain more of the nutrients?
Certainly as much as.
As much as.
I love frozen. I think brilliant for things like smoothies, frozen fruits, really fun for kids, things like smoothies with pineapple and mango and that kind of thing. Yes, I think it's such a good idea, Alex, to stop people doing, as you said, throwing something away because you didn't get around to eating it. And again, let's not forget behaviours around our ADHD brains. We sometimes forget. We sometimes completely change our mind. Maybe we just do not fancy what was going to be Tuesday's dish, and then it may be wasted. So having things frozen, I think, is absolutely brilliant. And you can do that with your own food. If you look in your fridge and you've chopped something up, I like to have things like chopped cucumber, carrots, that sort of thing, celery, to avoid us eating things like crisps at 6 o'clock. That's my time when I'm so hungry. And I think, nothing nicer than, a kettle chip dipped in something. But then I think, I've already chopped up all those nice veggies that I could have with a dip. I can still have the crisps, but as long as I'm mixing up that fibrous stuff as well. And whatever I don't have, I'll often fry them up in the morning with a couple of eggs for breakfast. The good old eggs and veg that's become very popular, I've noticed, on social media. But that's one I stand by. It's a good thing to do. Maybe not as attractive to children, but fantastic for blood sugar if you're an ADHD adult. Or put those things in the freezer. Yeah. Avocados, don't let them go to waste. I love those in the freezer. They're brilliant in smoothies. And the same with bananas going brown. You should have masses of bananas. You skin them, put them into a freezer bag, and they make the best smoothie base, which you can add to. Yeah.
The freezer hack is brilliant. Gone are the days of finding a hairy tomato or a mouldy broccoli at the back of the fridge.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's really important actually to just make sure that you're doing your best to not have that wastage, because it's really frustrating as well, isn't it? Yeah, we beat ourselves up for the old wastage, don't we? And again, that's a bit of an ADHD thing. We beat ourselves up maybe a bit more than other people, and sort of nag ourselves. So yeah, making sure we're being mindful of how we're eating and the behaviours around that. Yeah.
I calculated my ADHD tax just on wasted food was about 100 quid a month. Ooh. 100 quid went in the bin because I just forgot. Then it went past its sell-by date or it got mouldy.
But it's interesting that vegetables no longer have their sell-by date on them.
Or I forgot about them. And then I realised when I reached to the back of the fridge that the broccoli was hairier than it should have been.
And a liquefied cucumber. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, that's really not ideal. Yeah, we don't want that to happen. Yeah. Yeah, very much so. Yeah. That's the compost then.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Just like magic with the edit and the power of video editing, we have 3 superfoods on the table in front of us. What 3 foods are your superfoods that help people with ADHD?
Well, Alex, good question, because you said I could only bring 3. So first of all, it wouldn't just be 3. There would be a mountain of things on this table if there could be. But asked for 3 specifically, and I'm not going to suggest that they're superfoods, just because I don't attach to that word in as much as there are so many foods that are super, and they're usually not the things that are, as we've said before, expensive. They're the things that are run-of-the-mill every day under our nose, and we might just be missing them. And I feel quite passionate about that because, again, I know as ADHDers we're being marketed to by the endless pouches. And people often send me these pouches that have got protein in them maybe and caffeine in them and all sorts of blends of mushrooms. And I've said I love plants, so I love mushrooms. I have been drinking them or consuming them, preferably, the shiitakes, the mitakes, for years and years and years. But I'm not sure that we necessarily need to buy superfood pouches that are being directly marketed to us. So I would like to suggest 3 that I think are simple and brilliant to add to the diet. So the first one I'm going to pick up, so it's here, is an egg.
The humble egg.
The humble egg. There is your superfood. So this contains something called choline. And if you've heard of acetylcholine, which is one of the neurotransmitters, this will help you with the building block with that neurotransmitter. And that neurotransmitter, I think, is quite forgotten about somehow in ADHD when we're talking about dopamine and serotonin. But it's such an important one because it helps us with memory, with focus. It helps, interestingly, I read the other day, actually with muscle movement. So those of us that tend to stim or tend to move quite a lot to kind of push our dopamine a little more, this will help us with involuntary muscle movement. So that's from the acetylcholine perspective. It's protein, I said the 6 grams. So what if you had 2 on toast? You've already got 12 grams for breakfast, which is awesome. Or maybe you have an omelette for lunch. It's got natural fats. It's got those micronutrients in here. So zinc, vitamin D, which is so important for the synthesis of serotonin, magnesium. It's got a lot going on in an egg. And it's cheap. So I love them. Couldn't love them more. I used to keep chickens, but we've also got foxes nearby. But yeah, go for good quality here. If you are going to spend just a little bit more money on something, why not make it the things you eat most regularly? Good quality milk, good quality eggs, good quality oats, that sort of thing if you eat porridge. So I love an egg.
Organic, does that make a difference, or is that more of a welfare issue?
It is. It does. It can make a difference, and it can make a difference to taste. But again, read the top of the packaging. Go for something that's lived on a farm where it's describing where they're living, and make sure you make a good choice. So yes, free range, organic ideally, but I know price is important. So if it's just a little bit cheaper, but it's still free range, that's just as good. Yeah.
And that bit you said, the first bit you said before the protein, the chemical...
choline.
Is that in the yolk or the other bit?
Most of the goodness actually is in the yolk.
Okay.
Because the albumin, that's a weird word, the stuff around the outside is there to protect the inner piece. And it's often why people will say, I think I'm allergic to eggs. The human being, the mammal, is often a little sensitive to the white of an egg. That's what nature does. It's trying to protect the inner part. So if you're worried about that sort of thing, try eating the yolk and not the white if you need to. But the good stuff is in the yolk. Yeah, all those good nutrients is in the yolk.
Fascinating. What's next?
The next one is the blueberry. So this is seriously one of the foods I love so much because its colour is telling you how good it is. It's an extraordinary colour. If you've ever tried cooking them, so make like a compote out of them, could add some chia seeds, that becomes jam as an idea. Super easy to do, delicious with yogurt. Then you'll notice that the blue stains everything. It's absolutely amazing. And that blue that we get in certain foods is one of our many antioxidants. So every colour that you see in your fruits and vegetables is representing that different antioxidant that helps us fight free radicals, helps us clear inflammation all throughout the body. It mops that all up. These guys I particularly love because they're a type of antioxidant, and this is a word, so I'll take a deep breath, called an hang on, let me get this right. It's anthocyanin. So basically, it's a very strong antioxidant that is powerful for memory, for learning. You'll find it also in something like the skin of an apple, skin of grapes, things like red grapes, red cabbage, aubergine, that sort of thing. So these antioxidants are incredible, particularly for memory. I think people have done some experiments with these on kids doing exams. When I say experiments, good experiments, they've given them a ramekins worth of these just before an exam, and you just feel that extra oomph that you need. So I have these pretty much every day because I just think they're amazing powerhouses.
I was going to ask how much. You said a ramekin. What's a ramekin?
About like that.
Like a handful?
Handful.
Handfuls.
That's the one.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's a good measurement.
a handful. So they would be perfect with yogurt. I also think they're great for kids because they're kind of like sweets, aren't they? In a way, they taste a little bit like
very
sweets.
sweet.
Yeah. So why not? But that blue is just so powerful.
Eggs, blueberries. What's the third one?
And the third one, and it doesn't matter what brand, but this is peanut butter. Something really simple. Now, this can be any nut butter. I love peanut butter. You might prefer almond. There's macadamia now in the supermarkets. There's cashew. Nuts and seeds are so awesome for our health and particularly for brain health because they are packed with those micronutrients, B vitamins, zinc, magnesium, selenium. You can Google nuts and what they contain because different ones, different things. You know, the walnut is shaped like a brain because it's got such powerful nutrients for the brain. Pecan's slightly sweeter, delicious, got lots of selenium. So you're wanting to eat nuts and seeds in order to get those powerful micronutrients that ADHD brains need. But I wanted to highlight peanut butter because it doesn't come across as healthy, does it? Like, peanut butter. But it's an easy win. You may not, especially with children, get them eating peanuts on their own or nuts and seeds on their own. I mean, you might, that's great. But if you don't, would a nut butter work? That's great. Imagine a wholemeal bagel with this on it for breakfast and you can squash down some of those blueberries on the top. They stick to the peanut butter. You've got a perfect option. You take the egg, some flour, and you start making up a nice pancake. You can throw the blueberries into the mix. They burst as you put them into the frying pan. You can add some of this and maybe some yogurt on the side. You see where I'm going with that? So it's got so many uses. You can bake with it. I put a big spoonful into a smoothie with those frozen berries that you've got in your freezer, Alex. So you're going places with peanut butter or any nut butter. I love them.
Kind of want to end the podcast now and have a meal. You made me hungry.
These kind of go together. That's why I like the three as well. Yeah.
I know there's others. There's the three good ones. 3 bad foods. 3 foods that people should avoid if they have ADHD.
I'm not going to say 3 bad and highlight them as those demons. I would rather just say it takes us back to generally very high processed food, very beige food. I think there's an important piece here within nutrition, which I have to mention it's important to me and the people that I work with. Many neurodivergent minds also have that sensory profile happening there. So we've got to be careful of demonizing foods because it might be the things they love in terms of crunchy and beige. And what I would say to that, especially with selective eaters and especially for parents who are really challenged by nutrition because exactly those things are all that their child wants to eat and they're rejecting the other things like all the colour and maybe the eggs. So I would say, can you mimic those foods? Let's take a chicken nugget, for example. Can we just make that from scratch? Can we choose different outer toppings? You know, you can use almond crumb as well as breadcrumb to add a little bit more nutrient into it. Nice fresh chicken, that sort of thing. So, I think it's important that if we do have selective eaters, which is a real common overlap with ADHD, with autism, with dyslexia, that we're taking care of those individuals by kind of tweaking it. You know, you can make a pancake or a wrap, for example. I did recently with a young child by blending something like chickpeas. So not eating chickpeas on their own, which for kids is a bit ew, isn't it? It's a bit like curious as a pulse, but mix it with milk, mix it with flour, put it in a blender and create a wrap. And within that, you can put your other things you like some chicken, maybe some peppers. And you're just thinking out, cheese, thinking outside the box in terms of how can I take a beige food that would otherwise be deemed not ideal and make it work, if that makes sense. Yeah. Homemade biscuits, that sort of thing from, I make lots of biscuits from nut butter, for example, and they're actually high protein, high fat. They do taste good. Kids do like them. I'm not just selling that as though they're like, they do really like them. And it's important to find those ways we can do that.
You made me think, because I used to have a lot of spaghetti for lunch, high carbs lunches, and I noticed after my high carb lunches, my focus and concentration would immediately dip straight afterwards. And my partner, who'll love me for saying this because it was her idea, and it'd be interesting to hear your opinion, she kind of hacked my brain. And so rather I still had spaghetti, but half of the spaghetti was actually spiralized courgette.
Brilliant. Yeah.
And it really felt with the sauce that I had, it felt like I had spaghetti, but it was actually a courgette. And it saved me from having that slump afterwards.
Totally. So you met each other halfway, interestingly, like I did with my daughter. Because you want the pasta and you want that carby thing, but if you can mix it with something like courgette, you've got those extra nutrients, you've got extra fiber, that's slowing that blood sugar down. It's making your brain feel, more lifted, and you don't get that big slump the other side. And also think about the way that all the different countries around the world and different cultures eat their carbs. In Mexico, we don't eat rice on its own. We've got guacamole with it. We've got, refried beans. We've got the nice heavy beef. We put it all together. It's really important. We've got that sour cream on the side and all the bits, and it makes it that lovely community eating. Because there's more to food, isn't there? Especially for neurodivergent minds than it and the ingredients itself. There's also that sensory feeding in piece, which I do think is so important. So, and in Italy, we're going to eat those pastas with either a really delicious meat ragu or something very heavy and cheesy, which again is going to slow down from a kind of scientific perspective, the blood sugar, but it's also dishes that we fondly love or great grandma handed down and those sorts of things, which again play into our feelings, which I think is really important, how we feel about food and the sensory connection we get, the love of food that we get, which is really important to neurodivergent people.
Can you talk to me a little about blood sugar levels and the effect that has on someone with ADHD, either in a child or in an adult?
Yeah, it's been profound, Alex, for me. That's what I think is really interesting. It was that epiphany moment, if you like, that people have. It made me realise that my brain could feel so different if I sorted out my blood sugar. And you shouldn't mass generalize, but I do think a lot of neurodivergent people, again, it's that sensory piece. We are sensitive. We can be described as highly sensitive people. I would argue that the highly sensitive profile is within all of us who are neurodivergent. But what about if that's inside the body as well, that interoceptive feeling? So for me, it really helped to steady my brain. It was actually the first thing I noticed more than the physicality in my body was, wow, my brain feels kind of sparkly when I've eaten to steady my blood sugar. So when I've got those fats and those proteins right alongside my carbohydrates, I don't strip anything out. I don't eat low carb diet. In the States, you often hear the ADHD diet must be high protein, low carb. That's not a sensible thing. It's not sensible for me working with teenagers or teenage girls particularly. So I don't strip anything out, but I keep my blood sugar as steady as I possibly can. And it's literally helped me to really explore my ADHD brain, to really get the best out of it, to feel sustained. That slump you talked about, I don't feel those sensations when I've got it right. It's also really powerful to get it wrong and then to notice that, okay, I really now notice the difference. If I have a moment when I've eaten sugar, as I would say, naked, just fancied a piece of cake and had it right in the middle of the day when I haven't eaten something before, I would really, really notice it. So I think it's really important. It is the hardest piece for me to sell into kids and teenagers. They're just going to roll their eyes at me and do like, no, I don't want to change. No, I don't want to do it differently. But what's really interesting about that, we can have a few arguments together on that, is that when they give it a go, and I always say to people, if you don't try, you don't know how you're going to feel. When they do, their honest feedback is, yeah, I made it through maths and sciences and it was a bit better. I'm like, aha. So the difference between skipping your breakfast or having your breakfast, but particularly having the breakfast that was protein and fat rich, you actually really quite enjoyed your morning lessons. And they're like, yeah, all right, it works. I'm like, yes, the proof's in the pudding. Yeah.
Why do you think people with ADHD do struggle with diet so much?
Because I think it comes back to that sensory piece. I think there's more to it than just the foods itself. I think we do know to make the right choices. And then we trip ourselves up maybe along the way. We beat ourselves up. We shouldn't. If we get it wrong, we'll know about it. That's okay. It's what I call a reset, shake it off and then try a little better next time. But there's also quite a lot around it in terms of what our dopamine is sometimes pulling us and asking us to do. We do crave carbs. It is the easiest way to elevate dopamine. It's just a fact. So we're fighting a little bit against that, which is hard work in the first case. Also, again, coming back to that sensory profile, I work with quite a lot of people that find it quite hard to get feeling, that inner core feeling, if that makes sense. So there often be people that don't necessarily get sick very often, or if they have a tummy ache, they don't really recognize it. That sounds kind of interesting, but it's quite a thing within a lot of neurodivergent people that we can't access those sensations and those feelings. And that would go for the same with, therefore, binge eating. So I've had lunch, mind's wandered, not sure how much I had for lunch, if it was enough. And then the next thing I know, I want something else. But I haven't done the join up between my mind and my actual body. It sounds like almost like a disconnect. We talk about this gut-brain axis. In a lot of us, I think we've just got to give it more patience and more time. It's not our speciality, but we've got to give it time to really recognize that we did just eat. So we tend to be first, seconds, thirds, and then who else around the family has still left something on their plate. And we can ricochet between that and feeling okay to go hungry. Again, if you have mislaid the cues in your tummy, like those gripey feelings of needing to eat, and you're riding through them because you're in a hyperfocus at work, let's say, I do come across people say to me, wow, I've actually nearly missed all 3 meals of the day. I've just been on it, but now I don't feel good at all. So we may need to be using a timer, skilling up in order to remind ourselves, I must have a snack, I must have a break. A lot of people talk about 3 meals a day, no snacks. I just throw all that rule book out the window for ADHDers. I love a snack. I'm all over a snack. So whether that's just for me personally, and now I'm just saying to you all, have a snack, go for your lives. But, I do think we need to keep things steady, and sometimes that means we need a little bit more than others.
As an ADHD community, what else do you think we're misunderstanding about the connection between the brain health and the gut health?
That we see them as two really distinctly different things, which is kind of odd. We talk about our physical bodies, we talk about our mental bodies, we talk about even our spiritual bodies, but we think these are three disconnected different entities when they're not. When we're feeding ourselves well, we're feeding, yes, this healthy body and our organs, and one of those greatest organs is the muscle of the mind. So we must see it as a whole joined up piece. And there is that connection with, I know you've had a lovely guest on who's a doctor who talked about the gut health and that microbiome piece and that sort of superhighway, if you like, the HPA axis between the gut and the brain, the vagus nerve. There's so much we need to know more about on this. And there is confusion, I want to say, there in social media. I saw only the other day someone talking about 90% of serotonin is made by the guts, by the microbes in your gut. They are. That 90% is because we need serotonin in the gut. It stays in the gut. It's not shooting straight up to the brain. That would be crossing the blood-brain barrier. Oh, that was a tongue-tie thing. But they definitely influence the neurotransmitter activity in the brain, but science is still working that all out. It's an amazing piece of work that the scientists are looking at, but we mustn't be confused by thinking that if we eat these foods that are massively delicious for our gut bugs, that suddenly we're going to be full of serotonin in our brain. It doesn't work. The body is just more nuanced than that. I think that's what I'm trying to say. It's never as easy as that. Some people will say to me, oh, well, I've seen, even at the supermarket now and the chemist, you can buy tryptophan pills and tyrosine pills. So those building blocks for your neurotransmitters. If it was as simple as that, we'd all be doing it. It's not. And why not? Rather than pop a pill, why not eat the food that nature gave us first? It's definitely also less expensive.
I read something fascinating recently, and that was that chess grandmasters use up to 6,000 calories a day just by thinking so much. Do you think ADHD minds need more calories because of our rate of thinking?
With absolutely no science on this, I would say about myself, yes. And that would give me a good reason to be as greedy as I am. No, but it is really interesting. I do believe, especially when we're looking at nutrients, so there's 6 particular nutrients that are very powerful for ADHD brains. I do think that we use those up more quickly than neurotypical brains because we have brains that think faster. That is a commonality for all of us, is that even if you've got the inattentive type of ADHD, or that's how it's described, all of us in our own ways have this fast-paced brain. That's the magic of us. But because of that, I do think that we use up calories, as you've said, and we're using up those micronutrients that are so important for our neurotransmitter activity more easily. We're putting ourselves, if you like, under more pressure. You'll also use those things up if your fast-paced brain takes you to some quite challenging spaces and affects your mental health. So that co-occurring piece we often see with anxiety and depression, OCD, those sorts of things. So we use things up like the B vitamins, magnesium, zinc, really much more quickly than others because of that. And that's why it's so important to eat them, to find them in our food.
I really want to bust some diet myths. But first, I want to find out about your ADHD item.
Oh, yes.
I ask all my guests to tell me an item that most represents ADHD in their life. And yours was, very careful with it, very heavy.
Don't you drop it, Alex.
No. Oh my gosh.
It's my favourite.
Yeah, so firstly, what is it? And second, why?
This is one of my many, and I do say many because I have quite a collection of crystals. This is one of my favourites. It's called a serpentine, and it's a big confidence booster, this one. So I thought it would be helpful to bring with me, since this is the first podcast I've been on, quite nerve-wracking. So a nice, a steadier, a confidence booster. I love crystals. I do teach yoga, so that's kind of my morning ritual. And it's another thing alongside looking after my blood sugar that has really, really supported my brain. I'm the biggest advocate for repetitive movement of any description. It doesn't have to be yoga. I love yoga. That's for me. And my crystals come with me to yoga. They come with me everywhere, or I'm wearing them. And it's a funny one because people think of crystals like they're woo-woo and kind of wacky and a bit out there and a bit like witchy-woo. I don't mind if that's how people think about them, that's great. But they just come from the earth. They've been in there for thousands and hundreds of thousands of years, and they're all in these amazing different colours and varieties. And with each colour and variety, they bring with it a kind of a feeling. This one for confidence, others for love or compassion, or there's even one I have for public speaking. So I just think as an ADHDer, it's so lovely to have these around you. I have them around my desk. It brings me inspiration when I'm on screen working with clients. I have them on my website. So I brought with me actually for you, Alex, something for you to keep. I'll just reach down here.
Very exciting. You don't take that one with you, do you? That's really heavy. Everywhere you go.
It comes to yoga classes quite often.
It's impressive.
Yeah, it's called the Beyonce stone as a nickname because it's got that oomph. This one is for you. I'll give you the pouch and you can take it out.
Thank you.
So this is what we would call a thumb stone. They're sometimes called worry stones. And if you put your thumb in the middle of it and hold it.
Like this?
Yeah. You tell me. It feels kind of good, doesn't it? So it could be like a support stone or a fidget stone, people often call them. I hate the word fidget toys. I just think toys, we're adults. I don't want to call it that. But I would have that in my pocket. So when you're public speaking and doing the projects you do all over different countries, I'd like to think that you'll put that in your pocket and you'll think, yeah, I've got this. It's got that sort of vibe. That particular one is called a bloodstone, and the Vikings used to put it in their sword hilts so that they had that level of, I've got this. I'm in this to win it.
So it feels good, and it's got a lot of history.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it certainly gives my thumb something to do. Normally they're just
exactly. And so
fiddling.
I find a lot of fidget items are very big and cumbersome, and that's cool if that's what you want to be holding. But I like something that's just got that bit more depth and that bit, as you say, a bit of history, a bit of interest point, small enough. You know, for the kids I work with, that can go in the pencil case, it can go in your pocket, kind of, you know, one of every different colour to take everywhere with you. Yeah, I just find them really supportive for my brain.
Thank you very much. You'll see me using this on stage.
Good. I hope so.
Before we get to the busting some diet myths, you mentioned movement. Just very quickly, are there some basic movement exercises people can do in the morning to help set themselves up?
Yeah, I love something like the sun salutation movement in yoga. And that's a really easy one to just tap into YouTube and find anyone teaching you how to do that. You just need such a small space. That's why I love it. But I think any of those movements where you have a roll down through the spine, a lovely big stretch, take a nice deep breath, you know, breath work is so powerful. It's also really trendy at this current moment. And that's fine. I like the fact that it's reached that sort of status of being so popular. I think we always have to be wary of that. But just being aware of your breath, bringing awareness to your breath, and especially first thing in the morning. But other than more kind of held body weight exercises, you know, if you're brushing your teeth, why not do 20 squats? And that's a fantastic dopamine lifter. I was reading a book from... also, I'm going to forget his name. He's written this book called The ADHD Advantage. So forgive me for forgetting his name. But in the beginning of his book, he's an American author. He talks about how he goes to the men's and does a few squats before getting on stage. Because any type of movement, even you using that stone, is giving your dopamine a bump. That's why it's so important. It's so regulating for all neurodivergent minds, I think, to use any pattern of movement. I am particularly interested in repetitious movement because there's something in that. You know, when you watch someone playing tennis, it's a form of repetitious movement. The eye-ball coordination is fascinating, I think, for the vestibular system in the body. Again, that connection with vagus nerve. I've been listening to scientists talking, and I'm quite interested in this because I've got appalling vision. My son and I have that in common, that I think a lot of ADHDers do have some issues with eye tracking and that sort of thing. So I have found standing on one leg, for example, you know, you're boiling the kettle first thing in the morning, stand on one leg. If that doesn't help you to focus, I'd love people to contact me and say it's not working, because I know that it works. And the science around that is that you're actually using the cerebellum at the back of the brain to help you to balance, but that influences activity in the prefrontal cortex. And as ADHDers, again, something that frustrates me is everyone talks about, oh, you know, it's a condition, I hate that word, of a deficit, also hate that word, of dopamine, which we know it's not really. And that it's all about the prefrontal cortex. That's the piece, that's our thing. You know, it's all, we've got a muddled prefrontal cortex, it's all executive functioning issues. No, we do share that in common with anyone else who's neurodivergent, I would say. And each part of the brain speaks to another. Again, we can't separate these things up. It really frustrates me because standing on one leg is such a good example. Use your cerebellum, influence your prefrontal cortex, then get some work done and notice how much more effective you are.
Just had a visual of my partner walking into the kitchen tomorrow morning and seeing me there peanut buttering my toast, munching down my blueberries and standing on one leg.
Yeah, in your tree pose. Perfect. Absolutely perfect.
Alex, what are you doing? Well, Amber yesterday told me
to do all of these things. But guess what? Give them a try. Let me know how you get on.
Yeah, I'll pass on the feedback.
Yeah.
Let's bust some diet myths. Are there any commonly known diet myths that you can't believe people still think are credible?
There is a particular one related to ADHD that I repeatedly see. And clients will say to me, particularly about their children, so parents coaching with me will say, do we need to be on a gluten-free, dairy-free diet? And it really distresses me because it's another taking away from a diet. For a child, just try doing that. It's really hard. I don't want to take away from people who are celiac. It is essential that you're gluten-free and you have a condition that means you really need that supported. The same if you are lactose intolerant, but if you're doing it because you read on TikTok or saw it that this will be, again, I hate this language, the thing that will fix. Shocking language. We're not trying to fix. I wouldn't give my ADHD away for the world now that I understand how to live in my ADHD brain. But that whole language, which is also comes right back to what we were first talking about in nutrition in general. We're here to support this amazing brain. We are not here to make something get better. There is no such thing, and I feel very strongly about that. So I don't like to see things like that because people will argue with me around that. They'll say, oh, no, but I've read, so we're definitely sticking to this gluten-free, dairy-free diet. I'm like, well, okay, well, it just makes life a bit more challenging, but we can work with it, but it's just not ideal. And I think in the ADHD space and the neurodivergent space, that for me is the biggest at the moment as such. And maybe that other piece about how if we just eat a little bit of fermented food, we're suddenly going to get this huge boost of serotonin into the brain. They're great foods to eat. Fibrous foods, things that feed the gut microbes, fermented foods. But again, let's be realistic. I love kimchi. I make my own sauerkraut. I like a bit of kefir. I don't know many 8-year-olds that do. Maybe some sourdough. Maybe that's a tiny tweak. That's quite interesting. It's a nice product. Maybe a pickle. What's actually wrong with a pickle? Doesn't have to be kimchi that's really hot and spicy and super expensive if you don't make it yourself again. And again, I just think that is frustrating for people. Good quality, natural, thick Greek yogurt has all those goodies in it that you need and is inexpensive compared to something that's, got all these added things and things plugged into it. And the foods that say they've been fortified here and fortified there, just eat your egg. If you want to get those nutrients, you don't have to force the fortifying, if that makes sense. Yeah, we've just got to go back to being sensible and real about food and eating before we supplement. I'm all good with supplements, and especially if you've been to a professional, I might add, and that's what you need to do. Nutritional therapists, they are professionals, they have a degree, and that's important if you want to go the testing route and understand more about those nutrients that I've talked about. But the simplest way first to do it is just to eat the foods. You can Google top 5 foods that contain magnesium, and there you go. I would much prefer that families are doing that rather than buying an expensive pill. It won't do as good a job, won't be received by the body and recognised the way that food is.
Are there any other diet myths that might be particularly useful for an ADHD audience to hear?
Okay, what I would say about that is we don't need to go mad. If you're eating a good amount of protein foods, do you need to buy the protein pouch and the powders? Probably not. I'd love you to eat it first. If on top of food, you want to add a protein shake, if you're massively into your fitness, cool, you might be using up more protein than others. But if not, why are you doing it? Eat it first. It's not exactly a myth, but it is a question I repeatedly get asked. And it is a question that a lot of mothers of 15 and upwards lads will say to me, I'm panicked, all my lad wants to do is bulk and throw protein powder at it. Usually I can get them onto the screen with me as well and we'll have a good chat about it. I don't mind as long as it's supplemental to the 3 meals a day. I do mind if it is instead of food. That's getting into, a dangerous space.
I think it's time for the washing machine of woes. Every week I ask my community for their ADHD woes, and it goes in the washing machine because some people forget their clothes in the washing machine. Do you do that?
Everybody does that. Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Let's see what's inside the washing machine of woes this week. I have ADHD and a terrible sweet tooth. I try so many diets, but my impulsivity always wins, and I end up binging on sweet things and then totally crashing. What would you suggest for the millions of people just like me?
Lots of suggestions. It's really common, and it comes back to that dopamine piece. We just do have, without mass generalizing, we do have sweet tooths. And we just really want to fulfill that little space. So I think there are a couple of things to do. Sometimes it's around food, but actually sometimes it's around mindset. And it's where I put something called the reset into place. So in that moment, you're thinking, oh, I've really got to run to the cupboard right now and take those 3 ginger biscuits out of there and, throw them down my face. You might, this sounds like a really bizarre one, but it does work for me. You might fill up a basin with very cold water and put your face in it for a couple of minutes. You might drink a really cold glass of water. A shift in temperature is really interesting for the brain. You might have a warm drink. Start thinking about whether you really need the biscuits or the sweet, or whether just that shift of movement and activity has switched the energy in your brain away from the need. The need is still there. Is it just a treat? But at least would you do it a little less, or just have a couple of those sweets, 3 or 4 minstrels, whatever it might be. But the reset has at least stopped you going to the impulse piece of it. Could it just simply be a different food? Have you got things on tap, like a spoon in the peanut butter, a couple of blueberries on the side? If you had those instead, could you feel sated from those things rather than the really sweet one? Both of them work like a reset, if that makes sense, in that you've hopefully got some other choices. I make, for example, a mousse from blitzing in my NutriBullet, soaked cashew nuts, a splash of maple syrup, and some raw cacao powder. Just 3 ingredients. Does not take more than, if you've had those nuts soaking overnight in the fridge and they're ready, that literally takes you a couple of minutes, and then that's the sweet bit you wanted, but it's packed with all that goodness and the natural fats and the protein. So it's kind of skewing it. I have things like that, 3 little pots of that in the fridge each week, and it will stop me reaching for someone else in the family's naughty bag of, Maltesers or something. It's there, but I do understand the impulse piece. If it's not there, we will go to something else. So if you can think at the beginning of the week, what slightly sweet things can I make that aren't that sweet? Another favourite of mine is take your peanut butter, simply out the tub, mix it in a bowl with a few oats, and it will turn into sort of like a putty that you can work with. Make little discs, squash them, put them in the fridge, add a drizzle of chocolate to them. Keep them in the fridge, keep them in a Tupperware. And every time you think, oh, I fancy something sweet again, they're ready, they're there. And they're that quick to make. As quickly as I've said it out loud is how quick they are to make. So have those alternatives ready so that you don't, or hard one to do, especially if you've got a young family, but if you don't have the things there, if the crisps aren't there, if the chocolate packets are just not available, you can't have them. That's a bit harsh, I think, let's be honest. So it's kind of meeting ourselves where we're at, isn't it? So hopefully that's a few ideas, a few ways for people to curb or meet that sugar craving with something that's a bit more nutritious.
Yeah, fascinating and very tasty solution to the woe.
Oh, I regularly eat them and I promise they're good.
I have my own woe, actually. It's a question that I always ponder. What do you think the perfect 3 meals a day plan is for an ADHDer to use their brain to an optimal degree?
Probably what we've said in terms of please don't skip breakfast, particularly if you're one of those people regularly say to me, oh, but I've got to get off to school at 7 and I'm just not hungry. Well, fine, pack a smoothie and have it in your rucksack when you get to school. If you're an adult, do your fitness class or whatever you wanted to do first, and then come back to something good like your couple of eggs on toast and give yourself time around that so you're not rushing it. If you are super rushed, use those eggs, make homemade muffins. So many brilliant recipes out there, really healthy recipes. Make sure you don't skip. It's particularly important because a lot of people who are taking their ADHD medication will take it around breakfast, and then we won't feel that hungry. Maybe it's not the same for everybody's experience, but you may not feel as hungry at lunch. It's why I badger on and on about that protein-rich breakfast to really help support. You've got zinc in that early morning breakfast. Zinc is one of our nutrients that actually, interestingly, lifts the efficacy of ADHD stimulant medication. So it's a really good thing to try to get in. You'll find it in the egg. And then, if lunch does go a little bit wobbly, it doesn't matter so much. But if you missed breakfast, then it does really matter that you're not having a good lunch. And again, you don't have to be perfect, but you're just looking to squeeze in another bit of protein somewhere within that. Could be an easy wrap or something. There's, if you're working, there's great options at the high street usual spots where you just need to have a good look for the right things. There's places now that just do the boiled eggs, isn't there? Just a couple of boiled eggs and you might have a soup on the side of it. Again, that might be a bit too much. If you did have your eggs for breakfast, then maybe you don't need those. But there are so many better options on the high street now for kids that I work with who are at school in a city where, it's the high street for lunch or it's packed lunch. And then again, supper, can we make it family time? Can we not have supper sort of on the way home if we're younger? Can we wait till we get back? Because it's a really important piece of the overall ADHD picture in terms of it's been a long day. We are sensitive souls. It's important that when we get home, whether we're adults in a relationship or whether we're kids back home with our parents, we can say, tough day actually today, some stuff went wrong. We talk about that over food because it's community and it gives us that sense of belonging and softening into those spaces that might have felt a bit sharp around the edges. It helps us to celebrate our wins, which I think is so important from a mindset perspective in ADHD. What can we say that was awesome rather than, which so many young people say to me, I can't even think of what went right today. It's just been a horror show. And it's like, okay, but there must have been something you're grateful for. There must have been something that was funny or interesting that happened. And there always is.
Brilliant advice. Really good advice. I want to talk a little bit about sleep because I know it's something a lot of us struggle with. Do you have any hot tips with a focus on nutrition that might benefit an overactive mind unwinding for the day?
Yeah, it's a big one, Alex. It's a big one. It's a whole extra podcast, isn't it, on this? But and there are a lot of amazing sleep experts out there that we can tap into on social media. I like the breath work piece from a starting point, slowing things down towards the end of the day. One of the really key nutrients we can all be looking out for is magnesium. Magnesium helps us to sleep. It helps us to wind down. Why it does that is it helps us with one of the neurotransmitters that somehow I haven't talked about yet, but it's my favorite, which is GABA. And GABA is that inner yogi. It's that I feel relaxed. I feel like I've let down my nervous system. I'm out of sympathetic. I'm into parasympathetic. And that's going to help me to sleep. So we need to make sure that we're eating magnesium-rich foods, spinach, almonds, raspberries, dark chocolate, the most well-known. I always have dark chocolate before bed. I appreciate not everyone loves the taste of dark chocolate, but try to adapt to it. You could have lovely salty bath. That's the nicest way to do it. So magnesium sulfate is really cheap. You can get it just in the supermarket. Salty bath, get up to bed a little bit earlier. I was given a really nice tip, actually, which is not nutrition related. But once you've had the salty bath, I was told by someone that did CBT and hypnotherapy to never take anything work related to bed. That for me is one of my cheeky ADHD hyperfocuses. I'll take a paper about another neurotransmitter to bed with me and it's keeping me quite elevated. And I'm not a great reader. I've joined a book club for that reason. So I was told just have a piece of fiction by your bed. Get everything else out, your screens, any paperwork, any research. Just because you're reading a book about anxiety and the connection to ADHD, how's that going to make you anxious before bed? Brilliant. Don't do that. You read fiction. So I thought that was a really interesting one. Other GABA-rich foods. It's interesting with GABA, we don't need to make quite such a strong conversion the way we do with serotonin and dopamine. So actually we can eat instant GABA-rich foods, which again, some of those fermented foods, if you eat those during the day, they help to support the GABA pathway. Oats is another lovely one. So it might be that you have oats for breakfast. Going back to myths, they've got an awful reputation for hiring our blood sugar. Yes, technically they do. You don't eat them on their own. You don't eat porridge naked. You put your peanut butter, your blueberries. You can even stir an egg in, believe it or not. You won't notice it's in there. You've got nuts and seeds. You know where I'm going with that. So it's important because those foods really help us to find that soothing GABA space, which is what we need before bed.
Just honing in on that dark chocolate piece, is there a particular percentage that's optimal?
85% I would go for, yeah.
So really dark stuff.
And there's one more interesting ingredient, which a lot of the lovely tea brands and those sort of herbal brands are looking into, which is cherry and its relationship with the melatonin piece and how we sleep. So from a science perspective, if we've got good serotonin levels, we make melatonin. That is the pathway. Without serotonin, you can't make melatonin. So we want that pathway to be nice and smooth. We want to have fed our serotonin with those good protein-rich foods. And then there are those lovely herbal extras. So cherry extract is really nice. You can get that also in a tea. And simple things that people have been using for centuries, like chamomile tea. It really does work. Just thinking of ways to have your chamomile tea or your cherry tea in your salty bath with your piece of fiction. Good night's sleep.
Perfect relaxation. Yeah. Just finally, Amber, alcohol, good or bad for ADHD?
Bad. So why? Talking about GABA, the reason that we are so drawn to alcohol is it binds to the GABA receptor. So it's almost instantaneous for some of us that as we drink alcohol, even the feeling of it, we start to go, oh, I feel more chilled. Look at how we are at the end of the day. Oh, I've had a long day. I've got to have a glass of wine. And it's a little bit of that placebo effect. And it's a little bit of it really does work. And it works frustratingly well for lots of us, which is difficult because, again, it's something that an ADHD brain will really lean into. And I know because I've been there myself in my late teens, my 20s, some of us have that social dynamic we find challenging, which we have in common with our other neurodivergent friends. So that is a real difficult one for me. I can be quite socially anxious, and I'll cover that by appearing to be confident and an extrovert when I'm very much an introvert and perfectly happy to be, but need to cover it. And alcohol was always the way that I would do that. So many of us can relate to that, can't we? It's just kind of like you walk into the event or the drinks party and you grab that glass of whatever it is because you need to get a couple of those down before you actually do the mingling in the room. Slightly a pet hate of mine, actually. It makes me feel uncomfortable even talking about it. For me, that might even be something like going to watch a child in a hockey match and then there's that parent tea bit. And I actually dread it, though I'm sure when my friends listen to this, they'll think, oh no, she seems really friendly and happy to be there. I'd probably love a glass of something at that moment in the afternoon. I have stopped drinking alcohol altogether, interestingly, Alex, recently. It does not work for us because it's the after effects. It might make us feel looser in the moment. It might give us that instant feeling of GABA relax. It might help us to loosen up a little, but the next day it's a horror show. And again, it's a little like the coffee picture. Do we find it more difficult than others to actually process alcohol as a whole? Yes, I think we often do. And it leaves us, as I say, I don't like the word anxious, jangly the next day, jangly all over the place, heart racing, uncomfortable. We usually get drunk quite quickly. Some people would say that's really helpful. But it's not, because by the time we're drunk, we don't realize how much, and then impulse reaches for more glasses. So overall, no. Again, I have found it really powerful to let go of it entirely. And when I'm in a social situation, actually just to breathe into the moment, not to feel I need to talk for no reason, to really listen to people. I'm really enjoying parties more than I ever expected, especially dinners. I'll say to my husband, wow, just fascinating, that man I was sitting next to. I've learned this about him, and did you know his work, that, and blah. Whereas before, I would go into my ADHD mode, which is a bit me, if I'm being honest, and a bit all my special interests, all my special topics. I want to talk about all of them and bombard you with them. And I haven't listened to you. And that makes me feel bad the next day. I think, God, I didn't know anything about the person who was sat next to me. So I would say to people, try it, because there's nothing more satisfying than coming away from a social thing, whatever it might be, and going, I met some really interesting people. I interacted with people I didn't know, and I learned a lot about them, and that made me feel really good. Yeah.
Gosh, I always describe alcohol as like the short-term mask. It has a temporary effect, but the next day it just amplifies all of the bad things about ADHD and mutes all of the good things.
Yeah.
We have a closing tradition on the podcast, Amber, and that is for me to ask, what's your most impulsive thing you've ever done?
Well, we were chatting about this right at the beginning when we were just generally talking about impulsivity being so powerful. I love that about our ADHD. And I often see it categorized in the negative column, if you like. It's like one of the first things, you know you've got ADHD because you're really impulsive. It's one of the things I love most about my ADHD. It's really taken our family to extraordinary places. It's sort of how my children even came about, if I think about it. I won't say too much about that because my kids are watching going, ew, mum. But, spontaneous things like that. I think for me, the biggest one was probably when I overheard my husband about 12 years ago say to somebody next to him at a party that in his long-term goal, he'd like to move to the countryside. And I'm a Londoner. I grew up in the suburbs, but then moved at 18 to London. So I've always been more of a city dweller. And first I panicked. And then by the very next morning, I had my number with masses of estate agents. And without even consulting with my husband, I pretty much found us somewhere to live within a day. He was like, I didn't actually discuss it with you. And I was like, I know, but I overheard you. And I think it's the most exciting idea. And I'm on maternity leave, so let's do it. And we did. Really easy for him because he had his job in London still, and he simply had a slightly longer commute. I had only just learnt to drive, something that about city dwellers, we learn to drive much later. It's a whole another ADHD piece. I'm not the best driver or parker or parking tickets or any of the other impulsive things that happen when I park or park badly in the wrong place and try to get away with it. But I found myself with two tiny children navigating a farmstead it was just bonkers. We lived at the top of a farm track. I couldn't even walk out to get milk. I had to actually drive the car. I had just managed to pass my test in. You can then imagine how many bumps and things happened along the way. I just don't regret it now. And I think that's what's so important about impulsivity is it makes you do something in the moment. And actually what we're brilliant at as ADHDers is then turning that to our advantage and selling it. We're brilliant salespeople, we're brilliant marketeers. So we'll market it to our partner that it was the most awesome idea, even if we can see it might have been a bit out there. But I think that's really important, that it's a great positive about having ADHD.
I agree. I think it's why so many of us fearlessly start businesses. And I always joke that it's one of the positives of dating an ADHDer. You'll say, should we go on holiday? And your partner will go, oh, okay, in a few weeks. You'll go, no, we're going to the airport tonight.
It's brilliant. And I don't know that they regret that either, because they wouldn't have done that. We're the spontaneity they need. They've picked us for that reason. I think it's why we have good... I see a lot of people who are neurodivergent having relationships, but then a lot of us actually have this interconnected relationship with someone who's deeply neurotypical. I certainly do. And I definitely need my husband as my anchor when some of my ideas have gone quite out there. But I know that he loves the fact that we do some things we might not have otherwise done if I hadn't just cooked it up, like you said, last minute. Yeah.
Amber, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you very much.
Alex, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.